It was the kind of morning when the air carried both silence and history. I had woken up in my cabin, a small wooden home built by my own hands years ago, with the logs still carrying the smell of pine and smoke. The cabin wasn't much by modern standards. One bedroom, a stone fireplace, and a porch that looked out over miles of forest land. But to me, it wasn't just a house. It was my sanctuary, a place filled with memories of my late wife, the laughter of my grown kids when they were little, and a quiet freedom that no price tag could ever define. But that morning, as I sipped my black coffee from an old enamel cup and watched the mist curl through the trees, the peace was broken by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. An SUV rolled up, gleaming like it had just left the dealership. Out stepped a woman dressed in pressed khakis, oversized sunglasses, and a look that said she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to challenge. Her stride was brisk, almost military. She didn't wave or smile. She walked right up my porch as if she owned the place. "Excuse me," she said sharply, without introducing herself. "You can't stay here." I set my coffee down slowly, staring at her, wondering if I'd misheard. "Pardon me, this cabin, this land," she snapped, pointing at the trees as though she were scolding them too. "This is HOA property. You're trespassing. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association, and I'm telling you to pack up and leave before this gets messy." I chuckled, not because it was funny, but because sometimes disbelief comes out in laughter. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "I've been living here for over 30 years. Built this cabin myself. I think you might be mistaken." She folded her arms. "No mistake. We've been expanding the association boundaries. This area falls under our community now. We have rules, and one of those rules is no private cabins. This isn't a campground. It's a neighborhood." Her arrogance was staggering. I leaned back in my chair and studied her face, trying to figure out what kind of person has the audacity to stand on someone else's porch and tell them to leave their own home. The only word that fit was one my daughter used often when describing her office nemesis: Karen. This woman was a full-blown HOA Karen, and she wasn't about to let go of her imaginary authority. "Let me make this clear," she said, pulling a folded paper from her bag. "You have 72 hours to vacate before we escalate. The board has voted." I didn't even bother reading the paper she shoved toward me. Instead, I gave her the slowest, calmest smile I could muster. "Ma'am, this cabin sits on land that I own. And not just this cabin. I own this land as far as your eyes can see. I own the hills, the valleys, and the county line. Your HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over a single pine cone out here." Her face flushed crimson, but instead of backing down, she pulled out her phone. "Fine," she snapped. "If you won't listen, I'll let the authorities handle it." And with that, she dialed 911, standing there like a soldier ready for war. I sat quietly as she rattled off some exaggerated story about a squatter refusing to leave HOA property. She glanced at me smugly while waiting for a response, clearly imagining the sheriff rolling up to drag me out. But here's the thing about small counties: everyone knows everyone. And in this county, I wasn't just another name. I was the man who'd bought and preserved over 50,000 acres when the mining companies tried to strip it bare. I was the guy who built hiking trails, donated land to schools, and made sure the old church had enough wood every winter. And yes, by an odd turn of history and inheritance, I happened to own the majority of the county itself. About 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Sheriff Daniels stepped out, a tall man with a weathered face, the kind of lawman who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. He tipped his hat at me. "Morning, John." "Morning, Sheriff," I said, calm as ever. Karen stormed forward before I could add another word. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man is trespassing on HOA land. He refuses to leave. We need him removed immediately." Sheriff Daniels looked at her, then at me, then back at her again. "This cabin belongs to John," he said plainly. She blinked, confused. "No, it doesn't. This land is part of the Glenwood Meadows Association. I'm the president." The sheriff crossed his arms. "Ma'am, you're standing on private land. John owns it. Always has." Her jaw dropped. "That's impossible. Nobody owns this much land." I couldn't help but chuckle again. Well, ma'am, turns out some people do. And in this case, I own more than just this much. I own the county you're standing in. The silence that followed was delicious. She looked from me to the sheriff, waiting for him to contradict me, but he only nodded. Karen sputtered. You can't just own a whole county. That's outrageous. HOA rules supersede personal claims when community interests are at stake. Sheriff Daniels raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, the only rules that matter out here are the county's, and John happens to own most of it. If anything, your HOA paperwork isn't worth the paper it's printed on. You're the one trespassing if you don't have his permission. Her face twisted in rage. She snatched the paper back from me and stuffed it in her bag. This isn't over, she hissed. Then she stormed back to her SUV, tires spitting gravel as she sped off. The sheriff gave me a knowing smile. You sure do attract the colorful ones, John. I shrugged. Guess freedom always looks like trouble to people who don't have it. That should have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't the type to let things go. Over the next weeks, she launched a campaign of harassment. HOA members started showing up at the edge of my property, taking photos, filing bogus complaints, and even sending letters demanding I pay community fees. Each attempt grew more desperate, and each one I ignored with the same quiet patience that 30 years of living in the woods had taught me. But there's something I've learned in life, something I wish more people understood. When folks try to control you, it's usually because they've lost control of themselves. Karen was clinging to power, hoping rules and paperwork could give her the authority she never truly had. And the more she fought, the more foolish she looked. It reminds me of something my father used to say when I was a boy. Son, power isn't about owning people or paper. Real power is about standing on your land, looking the world in the eye, and knowing you've lived honest, without fear. And that, I've found, is the lesson most worth keeping.